Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most profound, honestly mind-boggling contradictions in all of human history. We're talking about the massive gap between the peaceful, almost unbelievably ingenious nature of early human civilizations and the brutal, exploitative empires that came later. I mean, have you ever stopped to wonder why human societies shifted from building perfectly engineered public baths and sewage systems to suddenly constructing towering monuments out of literal human skulls? It's a huge shift, and we're going to unpack it. So what truly defines a civilization anyway, especially when you compare it to an empire that's driven by nothing but a thirst for power? Like, is human greatness really measured by the vastness of the territory you conquer, or is it about the quality of life you provide for the everyday average person? Keep that question right in the back of your mind as we travel through time today, because the answers we find in the historical record are absolutely staggering. All right, let's jump right into our first era, the incredible, peaceful cities of the Indus Valley. It is just staggering to think that 5,000 years ago, the people of the Indus Valley were literally building functional smart cities. And here is the craziest part, the part that always gets me. They did the whole thing without kings, without towering palaces, and without standing armies. No way, right? When archaeologists first started digging up cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, they were totally baffled. They didn't find huge caches of weapons or massive monuments built to stroke the ego of some ruler. Instead, they found a society that was completely dedicated to the common good. And this just brilliantly illustrates the thematic whiplash of human history. You've got these early societies, like the Indus Valley, prioritizing public health, mapping out massive grid systems, focusing on equality, and then you look at later empires. Their absolute hallmark was endless bloodshed, stockpiling weaponry, and rulers who literally declared themselves gods on earth. Put simply, the Indus people spent their resources on plumbing, while later empires spent it all on swords. I mean, just think about how they achieved these uniform architectural marvels. Imagine this. 5 millennia ago, practically every single home had a private bathroom, a flush toilet connected to a covered street drainage system. They even had inspection chambers, which is exactly what we call a manhole today. And get this. Whether you were standing in modern-day Gujarat or miles away in Pakistan, the bricks they built with were perfectly standardized to a strict 4-to-2-to-1 ratio. It's like a giant puzzle they solved through peaceful trade and totally unparalleled urban planning, centuries before anyone else. Fast forward a bit, and things take a seriously dark turn as we witness the rise of ruthless empires. Take Genghis Khan. Now, his extreme cruelty didn't just come out of nowhere. It was born from a childhood of unimaginable suffering and betrayal out in the freezing Mongol steppes. Born as Temujin in 1162, he was only 9 years old when his father was poisoned by rivals. His own tribe completely abandoned him and his mother, leaving them to literally eat roots and rats in the forest just to survive. Later, he was even captured by a rival tribe and locked into this heavy, agonizing wooden collar called a kang. They treated him like an animal, and that horrifying environment taught him one brutal, defining lesson. To survive, you have to become harder than stone. So he grows up and unleashes a storm of death so massive, it literally cooled the Earth's temperature. Yet, despite that legacy of destruction, here's a number that is just wild. 1.6 crore. That's 16 million men alive today who are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. By taking the women from the empires he crushed, he fundamentally altered human genetics forever. To put that into perspective, roughly 1 in every 200 men walking the earth today carries his DNA. But he didn't just win by overpowering people with swords. He utilized these horrifying psychological tactics. When his army was besieging a city, the Mongols would take innocent captives, we're talking the elderly, women, children from towns they had already conquered, and force them right to the front lines. They used human beings as shields. It forced the defending armies to shoot arrows at their own innocent people. It was a deeply calculated, totally sickening move designed to absolutely shatter the enemy's morale before the real fighting even started. Okay, let's shift gears and look at how breathtaking beauty can sometimes mask a really dark reality. This is the tragic splendor of the Red Fort. Shah Jahan built this place to be a magnificent heaven on earth, but it very quickly descended into a site of bloody betrayal, mass looting, and eventually total colonial destruction. It was completed in 1648, right? The absolute pinnacle of wealth, home to the legendary Peacock Throne, which had the Kohinoor diamond just sitting right in it.
But fast forward to 1739, and it's being viciously looted by Nadir Shah of Iran. His invasion literally turned the Yamuna River red with blood. And then, finally, after the 1857 uprising, the British captured the fort and destroyed about 80% of its glorious pavilions.
So there is this deep, tragic irony here. Shah Jahan had this beautiful poetry inscribed right into the Diwan-e-Khas, the Hall of Private Audiences. If there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this. And back then, it really was. A paradise of solid silver ceilings and walls inlaid with precious gemstones. But when you realize that the British eventually stripped all those gems, tore up the lush gardens, and turned those exact same palatial halls into grimy military kitchens and barracks, well, those words suddenly feel incredibly haunting. And it gets worse. This heartbreaking poetry perfectly captures the sheer despair of the very last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar. The British actually put the 82-year-old emperor on trial in the exact same hall where his ancestors used to rule the world. He was found guilty of treason in his own country, and was exiled to a damp little cell in Rangoon. It was the definitive, highly humiliating end of a massive empire. Next up, we really need to examine the machinery of exploitation during the darkest days of the British Empire, the deception of Garmedia labor. You see, when the slave trade was banned, a simple legal document was weaponized to replace it with a brand new, equally horrific form of human trafficking. Illiterate, starving villagers in India were manipulated into putting their thumbprints on an English agreement. Because they couldn't speak the language, they mispronounced it as Girmit, and from that single moment, they became Girmidiyas. They were legally bound to leave their homeland forever, shipped off to corners of the globe they didn't even know existed. And what was the big promise that lured them in? A meager 8 to 10 rupees a month. That's it. That was the absolute lie used by agents, known as Arcatiyas, to trick starving farmers. These agents would tell them, hey, you're going to a place just a short boat ride away, and the soil there is literally made of gold. But the reality? They were herded onto overcrowded ships, bound for brutal, backbreaking overseas sugarcane fields in places like Fiji, Mauritius, and the Caribbean. Once on board, these human beings were reduced to mere inventory numbers, facing unspeakable daily horrors. The ships were essentially floating coffins, where diseases like cholera just ran absolutely rampant. And if they somehow survived the journey, they arrived to inescapable 5-year contracts, forced to work 12 to 18-hour shifts under the constant looming threat of a whip. Even worse, the women in the system faced horrifying systemic abuse, both out on the plantations and right at the transit camps like DLA back in India. They were treated as nothing more than property. Eventually, extreme oppression always reaches a breaking point. Let's look at Jallianwala Bagh and the absolute fire of resistance it sparked. The major catalyst from this resistance was a piece of legislation called the Rowlatt Act. This was a draconian law that gave the British the power to imprison literally any Indian on mere suspicion. No trial, nothing. The popular rallying cry against it on the streets became, no arguments, no lawyers, no appeals. This extreme, arrogant overreach by the colonial government was the spark that set off massive, completely peaceful protests all over India, but especially up in the Punjab region. Which brings us to April 13th, 1919. It was the festival day of Baisakhi. Thousands of unarmed men, women, and kids had gathered peacefully in an enclosed area called Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar. Then, General Dyer shows up. He blocks the only narrow exit out of the square. And without giving a single warning to the crowd, he orders his troops to open fire. In just 10 minutes, they fired exactly 1,650 rounds into a trapped, terrified crowd. Well over 1,000 innocent people died that day, and thousands more were left bleeding in the dirt. But here's the thing about brutal empires. They eventually push too far. The blood of the innocent at Jallianwala Bagh didn't just seep into the soil, it inspired an unstoppable, decades-long wave of resistance. A 12-year-old boy named Bhagat Singh actually went to the bog, collected that blood-soaked earth in a little glass bottle, and swore his entire life to the freedom struggle. Meanwhile, an eyewitness to the massacre, Udham Singh, held on to his vengeance for 21 long years. He literally traveled all the way to London in 1940 just to assassinate Michael O'Dwyer, the colonial official who had endorsed the brutal massacre. The countdown to the empire's collapse had officially begun.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this. How do the blueprints of our past continue to influence the structures we live in today? Are we working towards systems that look like the peaceful, health focused, incredibly smart Indus Valley? Or are we just repeating the same exploitative, power hungry mistakes of the brutal empires we just talked about? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next one.